Welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network, coming to you from the TeacherCast studios since 2011. Join us each week as we bring you the latest educational news, EdTech updates, and hottest interviews with today's most influential leaders in education. And now, for your host, Jeff Bradbury.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the TeacherCast Educational Network. My name is Jeff Bradbury. Thank you so much for joining us today and making TeacherCast your home for professional development. This is TeacherCast Podcast, episode number 229, and on today's show, we are talking all about makers, maker movement, and more importantly, a brand new book coming out from ISTE Publications called The Maker Playbook. And my guest today is the author of that book. And we're going to have a great conversation all about how you guys can bring maker activities into your classroom. But before we get to all of that stuff, I hope you guys are having a great school year so far. I certainly am. Been working really hard in our elementary schools, having a chance to work with our middle and high school principals and doing some great things with my digital learning coaches. And speaking about digital learning, guys, don't forget we have our Ask the Tech Coach podcast each and every Monday. Would love you guys to happen to check everything out over at askthetechcoach.com. Like, subscribe, follow. And if you are an instructional coach, we would love to have you join our free membership site. Our TeacherCast Tech Coaches Network now has over 350 instructional coaches in there, all working together to help each other out and to help each other build their program. So check everything out today over at askthetechcoach.com. Today, we are talking to the author of the brand new book from ISTE called The Maker Playbook. She is an amazing educator and technologist from the great state of Wisconsin. I want to bring on today my good friend, Miss Caroline Haebig. Caroline, how are you today? Welcome to the TeacherCast Podcast.
Doing great. It's been a wild year and it's only just getting started, but all in great ways.
Oh my goodness. I have been having such a great year so far working in elementary school, but you know what? I am having a problem bringing this whole concept of making into my school. The other day I was walking in the hallway and I saw one of our teachers with cups and strings and I said, that is awesome. And I started thinking to myself, how do I get other teachers to be that daring, dangerous, and inventing? You've got a nice little book out right now with our friends from ISTE. Talk to us a little bit about what you're doing these days and talk to us a little bit about the Maker Playbook.
Absolutely. So first and foremost, I'm a big believer that we as people, we as professionals, there's so many things that we're engaged in our lives. And unfortunately, if you're like me, there's like never enough hours in the day to get everything in that you want to get in, personal, professional, all the above. And as I think about maker learning and as I think about design thinking, I always want to help people I always say think big, but start small, right? And think about those learning intentions, thinking about your curriculum, those pieces that we know are non-negotiables. Those aren't fighting innovation. Those are actually an invitation. And I think they're an invitation to problem solving. And we know that, the more work we can do to engage students in creative problem solving, making connections to their real lives and the wonderments they have, the deeper their learning will go. And I really believe it's about how do we work with educators to find those moments within their standards and within their curriculum.
I think it's important that we start the show by saying the maker concept. I hear the words maker movement, but we can dive into that. But this really can be for any subject. I mean, I've done maker activities as a music teacher. I did them as an orchestra teacher. I've done them as a coach. We brought them into kindergarten. We brought them into biology. Maker really is for everybody.
I could not agree more. Actually, one of the biggest things that motivated me in my work and that to also writing this book is that maker learning doesn't just fit in, say, one type of course or with one type of grade level. It offers a variety of modalities and strategies to engage all learners in inventive problem solving. And then later, if you want, bringing in some of that computational thinking, although I know that can be a scary word for some people. There's so many fits. And like I said, it's really about thinking big, but starting small and saying, where in my curriculum can students engage, problem solve, and ask questions? And I believe all content areas in grade levels have those opportunities.
It's funny how you describe it that way, because when you say things like problem solve and ask questions, I'm going down to the other day when I'm walking into that kindergarten room and they're playing with Lego, they're playing with dinosaurs. Now, on one hand, kindergartners playtime. If the kindergarten teacher just said, what is the dinosaur doing? How is the dinosaur moving? That's asking questions and forming a hypothesis and all of that great stuff. I really, truly believe every teacher already has a makerspace in their room. They just need to unlock their own potential for it. Am I right?
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that's actually a really cool way to state that and say that, because I do believe a lot of people, and that's the thing. It's like, I also run into other people who are like, well, I'm already doing project-based learning, or I'm already doing these things. And sometimes it's about just taking that next step and looking at what maybe are their specific skills, whether you're looking at like ISTE student standards for innovative designer or computational thinker. Now, those standards, I think, really provide, that edge that kind of helps us take the work that we're already doing and take it a little further to prepare learners for their journey, whether it's within education, career, or life.
One of the things I've been finding is the possibilities. It really is endless possibilities for this. I mean, just going back to what we were talking about, a maker could be kindergarten kids with Lego and dinosaurs. When I was teaching in a middle school, a broadcasting course, and we had, video cameras, I was looking at that as I'm building a makerspace. And when I go out to do my professional development stuff and I bring my TeacherCast studio and I've got all the cameras, and I look at that also as a makerspace. I think too many people put their blinders on and say maker means marshmallows and spaghetti. Maker means 3D printers and gizmos, and there's so many different ways of looking at this.
Well, yes. One, there's so many different ways of looking at it. And I think it's important that we push the conversation to look at those different tools and modalities for prototyping and making. Because if you think about it, a lot of times it's those digital tools that also increase opportunities for accessibility. And when we look at how do we really create inclusive learning experiences across the board and look at the diverse needs and learner variability, I think the more we can broaden our view of ways learners can engage in prototyping and making, I think the better off we'll all be. And I think there's great opportunity. And sometimes when we forget to look at those things through this maker design thinking lens, we're actually cutting out a variety of opportunities they're really important.
On your book, which is again called the Maker Playbook. And by the way, all of this stuff that we're talking about today is going to be over at teachercast.net/Maker Playbook. And if you like this episode, if you want to learn more, I've got great news for you. This is just the first time that Caroline's going to be on. We're going to be really tearing this book apart and doing multi-series. We're going to do it also on our tech coaching channel. So stay tuned. teachercast.net/Maker Playbook. That's actually going to go to like a category page where we're just going to list everything out there. But I want to read a section here of her book, and I want her to comment on this. I want you to comment on this. This book is also for educators who believe that all students can learn, and for educators who take pride in developing the scaffolding to help all learners reach levels of higher order thinking and engagement. Who's this book for?
This book is for people who are working directly with students, and it's also for people working, whether you're working at a building level system or a district level system, to think of how do you create that inclusive maker learning culture at no matter what level you are working with. And I think it's the book intentionally, I wanted to think through what are those different pieces, because obviously our classrooms and our educators play a very powerful role in working directly with learners in order to engage them in this type of learning and thinking, but also having a school system or a school district that understands what are our shared commitments, and looking at inclusive learning and innovation, I think is important as well. So in this book, I tried to think about, how can you build something up from nothing, because that was actually one of the tasks that I was given when I was hired for one of the school districts I work with. And the superintendent first said, Caroline, I want you to put maker spaces in every building. And by the way, this was also when it was like, we're rolling out iPads and Chromebooks one-to-one and what's now Google Workspace, like all in the same year. And I was like, okay, I love it. But can we first define what maker learning is? And this was several years ago, so there's way more out now than there even was then. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted us, meaning working with our school leadership, our district leadership, and teachers and teacher champions, to really take an invested approach to define what does inclusive maker learning look like and where does it fit within our system. Because if there's one thing I know, people do not need just one more thing or one more thing that they could do, but how could this fit within not only the work that we're doing, but to take it further?
It's going back to what you just said. If I go back to when I was growing up, and this was in the 80s or so, the idea that does your school have a computer lab? And of course, that turned into everybody has a computer in their classroom now, here, but we've gone through the last 15 years, I would say, at least 10 years for me doing this as TeacherCast, where does your school have a makerspace? Now makerspaces are common, and now it seems like the concept of going to the makerspace is thankfully shifting into, in your own classroom, what's it going to look like? Mm-hmm. It's still a scary thing. Your book is put together in a very unique way. Talk to us a little bit about what we can expect when we see it, get our hands on it, and most importantly, talk to us a little bit about all of the supplements, because your book is QR code friendly. It's got extra stuff. It's got audio, video. It's got a ton of stuff on here. Talk to us a little bit about what somebody's going to be able to do and interact with.
So whether you are working with leading teachers or whether you're working directly with students, I wanted to work very hard to take those strategies that we're discussing and sharing in the book, and then also have them with accompanying templates that you can modify and you can make your own. Because I know all of us have as we talk about design and we talk about constraints, all of us in our professional lives face those as well. And I wanted people to be able to focus on the implementation and thinking through how can this work within my system, whether it's a school system, whether it's your classroom system. And I really wanted to have all of our how-to strategies be connected with resources that you could either do your grab and go, right? Like I purposely put things on a Google site, used a lot of Google Docs, Google Slides. I create a lot of content in Canva, so then people could just take it and use it, or also take it, tweak it and use it, because I know we all have like unique needs, whether it's our students, our organizations, our rooms, right? Our makerspaces, our classrooms. And as I was working on this book, not only did I want it to be a how-to, but I wanted to provide the reader with the resources to personalize, because I think that's where we also have our biggest impact as educators, is the way that we take our really powerful research-based strategies and then personalize them to meet the needs of our learners.
I'm looking through there's a complimentary Google site here. I'm looking at one of the examples as a Google Doc table 1.2. You've got like a dozen or so YouTube videos to check out, but you've also got all the instruments available for what is it? How does it work? Why do you work? Why is it important that makerspace not just be playtime? I asked the same question to our friends at Lego Education. It's not my kids are playing with toys. This is instructional stuff. Why is it important to be thinking makerspace and standards-based teaching?
I think because ultimately our standards are driving our work, and we want learners to grow as what are often now defined as assessment capable learners. That's kind of a big, heavy, kind of crazy term. But what it really means is that learners know where they are, where they're going and what do they need to do or what can they do when either they're stuck or need to revisit things to keep moving forward. And to me, as we think about maker learning and design through this idea of what it means to grow as an assessment capable learner or an expert learner, being resourceful, knowledgeable, purposeful, as we see in the CAST UDL guidelines, Universal Design for Learning guidelines, I really believe that starting with these standards provides us with those stepping stones for how we see our maker spaces. Because a lot of times people say, and I remember when we first got going with this, well, it's just a bunch of junk, or it's just a bunch of random stuff. And it's like, okay, well, I think we need to define prototyping because in helping make people make those connections to industry, like what does rapid prototyping look like in different industries, I think was also a very pivotal point for helping administrators as well as teachers start to understand it's not about the stuff, it's about what are we doing with the stuff. And going back to kind of that idea of standards, is it's helping us to think about what do students need to know and do. And then how are we using our talents as educators to mindfully craft experiences that get learners to those levels of higher order thinking?
You know, I'm looking through all these short videos here to see if you have the one that I always think of as Makerspace, as this is what it is. And it's the segment from Apollo 13 where they're trying to figure out how to get the CO2 level and the O2. You know what I'm talking like?
Yeah,
and they basically take.
I don't have it in there, but I know what you're talking about.
And they throw it on the table, and the guy literally says, "We got to make a round peg fit into a square hole," but using only these. And you see these doctors and MIT science, like, okay, figure this thing out, and that's no different than saying, "Here's some spaghetti and some marshmallows. Build a tower." These are skills that you might start teaching in kindergarten, but you're going to be using them throughout your entire year. Doesn't matter where you are. And
I think something to add on to that's really important, and that something I try to weave in at all different phases through the book, is how are we engaging learners and reflecting on that process, right? So you're given this challenge, they're working through it, but then stepping out into those metacognitive elements, stepping into more visible thinking strategies of seeing what are kids thinking about their own thinking and learning, and developing them as expert learners, I think is a really ripe opportunity in the midst of helping them not only understand and engage in a challenge or face constraints, and developing their solutions, but then how do we also use that kind of parallel opportunity to get kids to think about how they're developing as a learner?
One of the things I think we've learned over the last 18 months or so is how do we engage kids that are in front of us? How do we engage kids that are away from us? And, I can remember, March, April, when we first took off back in 2019, I think it was 20, whatever it was. And it's a long time ago. And I'm sitting there as a broadcasting teacher going, all right, I got things like WeVideo, I've got iPhones, I got this. What can I do to engage these kids in digital learning? How do I get them to do that makerspace? I want to ask you about remote strategies. Mm-hmm. We still have teachers that are teaching virtual. We still have teachers that are physical. We have these hybrid classrooms. I think we know how to do it by now, although every day's new. What can you talk to us about maker spaces, maker classrooms, and those kids that we can't see physically every day?
So a couple things. One of the elements in the book is we talk about what is the value of having, say, either a dedicated makerspace or resources, but I also go into what is the value of how to do it in a digital environment as well. And I think thinking through how are we using a lot of our either true learning management systems, whether it's like Canvas or many other tools. I could go on forever listing tools, all the way to looking at more workflow solutions like Google Classroom and Seesaw. There are specific ways that we can organize student learning experiences using those tools, but then also bringing in, like you said, a lot of those tools that are web-based that we know students we can ensure that they have access to, even if they don't have a lot of other materials, whether they be physical or digital tools available to them when they're in a remote or virtual environment. And using our learning management systems, our online workflow solutions to kind of help scaffold a process for learners, I think can be really huge. And then also, like we kind of mentioned before, looking at what are ways we can bring in elements of, say Scratch Junior, TinkerCAD, the list goes on and on, all the way to even looking at a lot of our video and even screencasting type apps that would allow learners to talk through their ideas, or to say literally sketch out a concept of a prototype and then label it and talk about how it would work. Bringing in those physical and digital elements, I think, is really important to think about. Another thing that, as I was writing the book and thinking about the types of strategies and experiences and how we really don't have to be confined to same time, same place. Looking at one of my favorite tools, such as dot storming, which allows learners to either, vote and curate ideas and vote on them, I think can be really powerful. Finding uses for Jamboard. Jamboard, I think, has amazing potential and possibilities. Same with Padlet, and looking at ways for learners to always be able to contribute, but also maximize different modalities. So one of the things I love about Padlet is that at different phases of the design process or a challenge, whether you're doing a big design process or a small little just challenge that gets kids thinking inventively, I think that providing ways for students to kind of share out and document that thinking along the way is really important, not only for individuals, but to help learners think about how do we interact and engage synchronously as well as asynchronously. And I think there's a lot of tools that allow us to break down a lot of those barriers, and also, as a byproduct, really do make that student thinking more visible and audible than other opportunities that maybe we would have just done more traditionally.
When I'm listening to what you're saying and when I'm thinking about my experiences and even the other people in the past who have come on and talked about making and stuff, you talk a lot in the book about culture and having a maker culture. Quick question, then a long question here. Okay. Does the maker culture start in the classroom, or does the maker culture start in the main office with the principal?
Ooh, that's a good question. And honestly, I think the answer, so getting to kind of like your long part but I'll make it short, I think, put it this way. If you have a main office that is willing to do that work and dive in, that's amazing. But I also know, as being an educator who, as one of my former principals that I used to work with would say, when, Caroline has an idea, you got to let her run with it. And I think the more we can help teachers find that empowerment, find that connection, and run with things and develop those cultures within their classroom, that's going to touch a lot of kids as well. So I think a lot of times it has to do with, what are the constraints and what are the organizations you're working in, right? And I think in some school systems, you have leadership who is eager and interested in going down that path and connecting it to their other goals, projects, and initiatives that are in place. And that's amazing. Mm-hmm. But if that's not where your school system is at, and you have this passion for innovation and student thinking and problem solving, I think there's a lot of these similar tools. And in chapter 4, we look at what are ways you can start to build that culture in your classroom. So for example, one of the strategies in the book talks about ways to define maker learning. And then I talk about the importance of having teacher champions in your school system to define what maker learning looks like. You can do the same thing in your classroom, right? And think about how that's important. Also in your classroom, in chapter 4, we look at, as chapter 4 and 3, we look at creating shared work agreements, right? Like helping kids dive in and unpack, what does it look like to collaborate? What does it look like to provide feedback? What does it look like to brainstorm and create these processes and that culture of what do we believe? How do we act? I think is really powerful. And the book, I really wanted to aim, how do you build that culture no matter where you are in your school system? Because I think it has value no matter where you are in your school system to take that cultural approach.
That actually dives. That actually goes into my next question here, which is when you're talking about culture, it's where does it come from? And I'll use the example that as a music teacher, my background is in violin and viola. So when I pick it up, I am a violinist teaching. If I pick up a cello, I am somebody playing the cello. If I do the makerspace analogy, we all can think of who are good makerspace teachers. Like I got a friend who's a good puppeteer. That's a makerspace. I got a video guy. He's a makerspace. Or I happen to be teaching science. There's a makerspace in there, but you know that teacher might not fully embrace, fully get. How do you build a maker teacher? What are the qualities of a good? I know what I want to ask you. I just don't know the words right now.
I think I know where you're going.
But how, how do you not just go through the motions because somebody says, I want this? How do you actually get to be a maker teacher with all this stuff and, really be a maker head?
I love when I work with teachers is to say, what are you currently working on? What do students need to know and do? Like tell me, like, what do you already have going on? Because I know like every teacher has like great things happening in some way or another. Right. And I like hearing like, what's it already look like? Then I like to ask the question, in a perfect world, what would you like to see more of out of your students? Or what are things that you think they're doing okay, but or maybe some kids are doing well and other kids are maybe struggling a little bit? What do you see, right? So diving into like getting that pulse on, who are our learners? What are the things that they're facing in their learning? And a lot of times that then leads into a conversation about, I wonder if, or I thought of, I was thinking about what you said and what if we looked at it this way, or asking a lot of questions really with educators. And I think the other thing is helping teachers come to that understanding that one, we honor their skills, we honor their content areas, and looking at, I bet you one of the things that makes most individuals passionate about their content area or specific content areas that maybe they have a passion for, if they're teaching multiple content areas, is that there's some way that they can connect what kids are learning to the real world, right? Yeah. And to ask questions, see this work in action. And it then becomes about how do you create a challenge for learners to make those connections? So some examples. One, I was working with some world language teachers and they were saying, well, how are we going to do this? And I said, well, let's think about this. What are your students learning? What are they working on? And obviously the target language and developing those skills is like number one. But then in part of their units, they're also looking at Spanish-speaking cultures, different geographical areas, and some of the challenges that persist in different cultures and geographical areas. And we kind of came to this idea that it could actually become a challenge where, we know that people in certain Spanish-speaking countries don't have the greatest awareness to the access of healthcare or resources that they have. And we thought, hey, this could be an interesting opportunity for students and learners to do some research and think about, as they're thinking about their target language, how would you, without telling them what product to create, without telling them, you're going to make XYZ to do XYZ, helping them think through how can we use the target language? What are different solutions that we could create to increase awareness within Spanish-speaking communities to learn more about healthcare resources? or I taught advanced placement psychology. And I like to force myself into thinking about like, how would I have done this? And I was thinking, okay, something that's really hard for people to understand are neurotransmission, like how a neuron fires, like that. It's not something we see happening. We see the outcomes, obviously, of it, but like what's going on in that process in the brain. And I had a couple thoughts. Like if I were doing a maker learning experience, I would ask my students, how would you explain a concept that is rather abstract to someone based on, say, what you know from what we've learned about learning and cognition, from what we've learned about neurotransmitters and different diseases and disorders. For example, create a situation where, hey, what solution would you provide to, say, a nursing home or, say, a organization that deals with Parkinson's? Like, how can you help families better understand what's going on with that disease or within the brain? And a challenge could be how can you then create simulations? How can you create models? How do you raise that awareness and build that understanding? And it could be anywhere from a disorder to looking at how kids learn, right? Mm-hmm. And providing that kind of challenge that would require my students to think about what is it that, our content is, but then how do we apply it? And when we look at that application of learning, that often opens the door to creating a maker challenge.
If you're looking for more information about this, as I mentioned earlier, we are going to be having Caroline on the show several times, including probably the next time we come on, we're going to be doing it as an Ask the Tech Coach episode. Certainly make sure that you guys head on over to askthetechcoach.com, hit that subscribe button, like and follow. We would love to have you guys come on there. Caroline, you are awesome. You just absolutely floored me when you said AP Psychology. That's amazing. I can do a whole show on that. But for right now, the book is called The Maker Playbook. It is out there from ISTE, and we want to say thank you to ISTE for putting everything together. Caroline, where can we learn more information? Where do we pick up the book? All that good stuff.
It's available at the ISTE bookstore. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. It's coming out ready to ship on September 28th. I just got my copies today. So it's on its way and it's ready to go. And also one thing I want to point out is if you like the more interactive and engagement, we also have a Facebook page. And the goal of that is to kind of keep the conversation going and have that more interactive component to the book as well. So a lot of options.
It is a great book. I'm definitely going to be deep diving into it, both as a broadcaster, as Caroline and I do more shows, but definitely as a tech coach, getting more into the digital learning side of it, standards-driven learning sides. I got to tell you, Caroline, the thing that I love about the book the most is if you look at the top right, it says in big letters, for school leaders. This is something that if you're going to be bringing in a culture, you can't just do it in your classroom. Maker costs money. Maker requires space. Maker requires community support. I've had a lot of teachers say, I'd love to do this, but my principal wants to know the grading policy and the rubric. Like some of these things, there needs to be, as you mentioned earlier, an understanding of all of that stuff. Luckily, we're going to have many, many shows to get together and talk about each of those subjects. So check out other things over on teachercast.net/Maker Playbook. Before we get into that, Caroline, can you throw a couple of those social media links? What's your Twitter? What's your things like that on here?
Twitter is just @Haebig. So my last name, Haebig. And the Facebook page is something I can get you later. Group. It's a group, not a page. Sorry, it's interactive. We
will make sure we have all the links over there. This is TeacherCast Podcast, episode number 229. Her name is Caroline Haebig. My name is Jeff Bradbury. And on behalf of everybody here at ISTE TeacherCast and everybody here on the TeacherCast Educational Network, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Keep up the great work in your classroom and continue sharing your passions with your students.
You've been listening to the TeacherCast Educational Network, hosted by Jeff Bradbury. Please reach out to the show with all of your questions on Twitter @TeacherCast or online at www.teachercast.net. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. And please take a moment to write a review in the App Store.